I'm John Mark Reynolds. I'm the president of the St. Constantine School, and I've been involved in many higher education and K through 12 educational programs. Also serve on several boards, including the Orthodox Christian Leadership group that's sponsoring this conference. I think the most unpleasant topic that comes up every once in a while is when I begin to plan for my successor at a place like St. Constantine. I started teaching when I was 20, and yet, even in those organizations, you had to think about, what will I do in this job? I started the Torrey Honors Institute at Biola. What would it look like if I leave? After all, you can't control your health. You can't control your future. You don't know what you should do. And in fact, in the case of the Torrey Honors Institute at Biola, I wanted to plan ahead because I started so young. I was like 30 years old when we really got going with Torrey Honors. And after about 17, 18 years of doing the same thing, it's worth saying, maybe it's time for somebody to come and replace me. Maybe they need some fresh blood. So it's not merely a matter of needing to plan for the future because, God willing, we live to a full life, but we don't control that. It's not merely about the fact that now I'm an older person and a decade from now I should retire, somewhere in there, 13, 14 years from now I should retire. It's also the case that at a certain point you need to step back and look at your nonprofit or your ministry and say, am I still good for this organization, or does it need fresh blood? Do I need to go do something new? And if you haven't raised up leaders, people who are able to step up to fulfill those roles at every level of your organization, then you've really failed. My dad pounded into me from the time I was a little boy, very successful pastor, before he became Orthodox, leader of a small denomination, served on the board of the National Association of Evangelicals. And he said this, time and time again, people would have wonderful works, they would do good things, but then there was no success for them in the end because they had not planned for a successor. Often just the kid that was the heir of that successor would inherit a ministry or inherit a job that they weren't really very good at. This is true in business. This is true in every area of life. Sometimes that is the right person to take over. And so we'll talk about some of the principles behind making sure you're sowing the seeds so that at any moment somebody could step in and take your job. And this is vital. And it's not just the job of the CEO, of course. It's the job of every critical part of the organization. So I work in education. Are we educating inside the college at St. Constantine the sort of person who could take over the teaching jobs all over the K through 12 school or even inside the college? Are we producing at every level the next college professor, the next high school teacher, the next nursery director? Is that what we're doing? Are we always bringing in young adults, mentoring them, and preparing them for the next step? So let's take a look at some of these principles. I learned some of these principles from my dad, but I also learned them from a Berkeley law professor. Charles Angelot evidently had him for class back in the day. Philip E. Johnson, most famous for starting something called the Intelligent Design Movement, but he also clerked for Earl Warren, graduated first in his class at the University of Chicago. Again and again, he spearheaded different movements in the state of California inside of thought. And in every one of those areas, one of the biggest things about Phil was, while he was clearly the leader, while he was the father figure, he was constantly bringing up people to step in to his shoes in the many different areas where he participated. Whether that was being a law professor and raising up a new generation of lawyers, whether it was mentoring people in some of the causes he supported, like intelligent design, and then finally in areas of education. He was a long time at Berkeley university professor, so he cared deeply about higher education and the future of higher education. I remember going with Phil, whose time was so valuable. People all over the country wanted a piece of his time as a young academic. And I wasn't the only one he did this with, but going with Phil down to a duck pond as he would have called it. I think there were mostly geese in it, actually, or running around it. And walking with him around the duck pond and having him outline some of the things he'd learned about higher education, some of the problems that he saw, even in a fantastic university like the University of California, Berkeley. And he began to describe what we needed to do in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, in the next 15 years. And that talk, where he began to invite me in to his mental activity, to his vision of the future, changed my life forever. I committed to him that I would work with him to develop the thin edge of the wedge, which would push into the system and split apart this big monolith of higher education so that it could be freed up, so that we could get rid of student debt, so that ideas that couldn't be heard in the current system could begin to be heard. And so that kind of mentoring, which he did with many people, sowing many seeds across the United States and even the world, is vital even if you're in a tiny organization. In other words, let's say you're on a parish council and you've been the person on the parish council. You're the person that everyone says, man, if you go to Saint so-and-so, boy, you better talk to this person. That's all and totally valuable. Well, generationally, who are you implanting a vision like I got near the duck pond? Who are you kind of pulling back the curtain for and saying, you know, I'm not going to be able to do this forever. I need the next generation to step up, or maybe I should step down in a couple of years and you're going to come and take my place, and I'll be here to mentor you because I'm not going to wait until I no longer can mentor you or transition leadership. So if we begin with anything, I want to begin with this vision that Phil cast in my life, and then talk about some of the fruit. Eventually we'll end saying a wonderful thing that happened at the very end of his life. A sad thing about being 57, my age, is some of your mentors begin to slip away more and more. And Phil suffered 2 strokes and then passed away at the end of last year, about a year ago. And so I want to honor him, but also honor some of the principles he taught me and some of the work he did. The first principle is that there is a necessity for a constant successor search. And the more critical the leader to the nonprofit or to the organization or to the parish, the more important this is to be done right away, constantly. Because again, in a good, healthy organization, the leader in any area, it could be a nursery, it could be a Sunday school leader, it could be a leader of a nonprofit, it could be a leader of part of a nonprofit. That leader is not dictator. And you can't pick the person necessarily that will step into your shoes, that will come along. The organization, whether it's the board or some other group, may choose someone else. The wider you have distributed mentoring, the more people you have inside the organization that are plausible leaders, the less you're trying to control the future, that you're trying to manipulate what must be. And of course, it's just good to do this anyway. Part of being a good leader is mentoring the next generation, letting them know how you make decisions, how processes work, how does the organization work, and doing this with several people constantly, and then sending them forth to run other organizations often is enormously practical. So this successor search is constant. Not because you're about to retire. I hope, Lord willing, I'm not about to retire and that I will finish more than a decade at St. Constantine and go forward. I don't control that, but Lord willing, and God willing, that's what I want to do. But what should I be doing? I need to be finding some 30-somethings, some 20-somethings, and pouring out my life into those people and saying, here's what I've learned over a period of time. Here's what it would look like to do my job. Because there are plenty of people that work for me right now who in their heart of hearts think, I'm the right age. Maybe someday I should be president of this organization. And that should be true. The other thing is, in a big enough organization, and at this point, thank God, St. Constantine started 5 years ago, now has about 70 employees. And there are so many levels of our organization where I'm one deep. I have one super talented person who's caught the vision, But if they left to go do something else, and don't headhunt them, if they left to do something else, have we produced their protege or several proteges, people who could step in and do their job? Or have we identified such people in outside organizations, brought them in, talked with them, had some preliminary conversations about how our organization works? So the first principle is the necessity of a constant search for a successor. The second thing is that we need to hire and mentor multiple successors in the organization. I've already touched on that briefly, but here's why this is so critical. A leader might decide that he knows or she knows exactly who the successor should be. And they pour out their life into that person, and then that person goes to another organization. That person was a mistake. They have some flaw or some inability, or the board just doesn't get along with the person in whom you've picked to pour your life. So having multiple successors also does another thing. All of us, if we're not very careful, tend to think that the next person to do our job will be a lot like we are. And so we might pick someone who has our gifts. And really the organization may need somebody with an opposite gift set or a different gift set. And if I only pick one or two persons to mentor, if the organization begins to narrow down too quickly, then I might not consider that quiet 20-something over in the corner, she might be the person who should be the next president of the St. Constantine School. That will be the board's choice. How do I know? How do I know who would like to apply? Could I mentor her? Could I reach out to her and say, hey, let's have a conversation about what it would be to be an executive in this organization? This keeps me from narrowing down my focus to one particular type of person that I might think the organization needs. So we need to hire and mentor multiple successors in the organization. That means every once in a while, when you're in an educational organization and you're looking for new teachers, you should, in the talent pool, not just pick the person that might be the best fifth grade teacher, but you'd say, I think that person has some leadership skills and she might be able to become an ex-dean. And if they became a dean, maybe they could step into the place of the CFO, or maybe they could step into the place of this other person in leadership. And so you begin to cultivate this at multiple levels. Now, what if you don't do a lot of hiring? I'm blessed because as a school, we have to hire lots of teachers, and that's a great place to look for future talent for the kind of thing we do. What if you're a volunteer-driven organization? Then once again, as you bring in volunteers, are you always and constantly talent hunting? Are you always looking to see who's a person that are 2 or 3 paid employees? If one of those people went down, here are 5 or 6 people that I've already worked with who know our ministry that I'd want to bring in and give this job to, or would be able to do this job. The next principle is you need to promote successors to external organizations for seasoning. And this is really hard for a lot of people. I've worked with and for organizations that often try to hide talented people from headhunters or from good job opportunities. But my experience over the last 30 years has been that if I benefit someone's career, so I have a super sharp and talented teacher who believes that they should be a headmaster, and I'm in the little Houston campus where the headmaster is pretty young, and if 20-something tries to wait until that person retires, they're never going to be headmaster. You're a fantastic headmaster here at the Houston campus. So I get calls all the time from different organizations that say, I'm looking for someone to run a classical Christian school. I'm looking for someone to help with an Orthodox school. Do I think to myself, even about my current headmaster, I would never recommend that person because I need them, even if it's in the best interest of the person I'm mentoring. Look, if we love each other and we are in an organization, particularly a nonprofit or a Christian or an Orthodox organization, and we stifle the human flourishing of the people we work with, I believe that comes back and bites us. I believe if, on the other hand, you throw people opportunities, often they don't take them. but they feel happy that in your judgment, this more prestigious place, this higher paying job, you think that they can do it, then they may stay or they may go. But notice that means all over the country you can end up with people who are eager to come back or eager to give advice or become allies because you've served them well. And so I think the next principle in having a successor so that an organization can succeed after we're gone by God's grace is to promote people out of your organization. Not because they don't fit, but because they are fantastic. This, of course, also enables them to get seasoning so that if they do come back, because you've sent out 3 prototype CFOs and the CFO finally retires and 3 people apply for the job, they've gained insights and perspectives that they could never get simply by being inside the same organization all the time. The other principle that we've alluded to is replacement is not replication. So I have some fantastic cabinet members in the president's cabinet. I've worked with some of these people over a decade. And they are so good that I can't imagine somebody being the director of marketing and communications who's not named Megan Muller. But it could be good for her career to leave. My temptation will be, okay, I've found lots of like proto Megan Mullers, and everyone has to be like Megan to do this job. It's a huge mistake, of course, because many of the characteristics that make Megan fantastic at her job are part of a composite and are kind of separately incidental to what she does. And so you could put together a whole nother package of characteristics that would enable somebody to be fantastic at the job. And you don't want to miss that kind of talent. This is the sort of person that's never seen a leader of an organization that isn't male and misses the fact that they have a female in their organization that should be able to do the job. That's not saying just hire somebody because they're female. It is saying make sure that you don't get in your head that this person has to look a certain way or have these particular gifts, because we're dealing with replacement for a job, not replication. Now, of course, the CFO needs to be good at certain things. They need a certain skill set. The director of marketing and communications will need some basic skills. But think of all the many schools in the United States and all the headmasters, and think of how different their personalities are, their physical appearance, the way they come across. Again, since I tend to be a vision casting leader, the temptation would be to say, well, St. Constantine needs a vision casting leader. That's what we had. That's what made us successful. No, first of all, God's good grace made you successful. But second of all, there is a different way to be a leader that isn't so loud, that isn't vision casting, that might be more detail oriented, left to right oriented, but is also visionary. So we have to make sure that we're not just replicating what we're doing. Next are the virtues and vices of family hires. Now, this can be quite controversial, and boards have to look at this very carefully. But often, an organization will make a mistake by refusing to look at someone from the family of a leader. Oh, we can't do that. We can't. It's legion right now in the news, the mistake of simply hiring somebody because they're part of the family. On the other hand, you might have somebody that's gone out, gotten a different kind of job, gotten different seasonings, been successful, but they also deeply and at a passionate level understand the ministry, and perhaps in a different role can be brought in. So I think boards make a mistake when they refuse to consider a family member for a different type of leadership role. But also, of course, the vices of doing so are equally bad. My dad used to say the anointing of God for a particular job, or even the talent to do a particular job, isn't genetic. Just because somebody is the daughter of a successful leader doesn't inherently mean that they will be a successful leader. But you want to be careful inside an organization to not miss out on talent out of a fear of nepotism. Now, because so many ministries become family businesses or family-run concerns. The opposite error is easy to make as well. Well, so-and-so is like his dad, or so-and-so has the same last name as the current leader, so that makes it better. That's a hard road for boards in particular to walk, but I think it's hard for leaders to walk. You have somebody who's a cousin or a nephew. It doesn't even have to be a direct child. It can be a brother. It can be an uncle. And you're looking around and you suddenly realize you've never realized that Uncle so-and-so is really good at the sort of thing you do. And because you've only viewed them as an uncle or a relative, you never consider the fact that that giant talent pool could be useful to your organization. And if they're a younger person, let's say a third cousin, that perhaps they have the talent that you really want to sow seeds of leadership inside of. So be careful to not miss the virtues of family hires, but also not fall into the vice of just assuming, well, a Reynolds has run the St. Constantine school, so a Reynolds should run it again. Probably not is the answer to that question. But it shouldn't be disqualifying either if the previous leader has done a good job. Here's the real message to a leader. It's probably the case that your children won't end up in your leadership role at your organization. It's also probably the case that most of the people you mentor in any role in your organization won't end up with your job. Sowing many seeds, they bear good fruit, but not all the fruit will be eaten at the table of the organization you work at. So make sure that you're not overlooking training your children or cousins or family members or people that you might not normally think of as having a leadership role simply because you know them in some other kind of way. They may not end up in your organization, but they will end up benefiting the Orthodox Church by becoming a powerful parish council president, by becoming a powerful Sunday school teacher, by doing something to help revolutionize the church and make it a place that's growing and thriving and doing evangelism. Now, here's a problem in many organizations that I consult with, and generally those are higher education organizations. When they go to find a leader or even to think about succession planning, they have no idea what their actual mission is. What do? They have some vague platitudinous statement in the front of a catalog or some mission statement, but what is it they really do? What is it that the organization exists on a daily basis to do? Our goal at St. Constantine is to prepare saints for paradise. We're here to try to advance the mission of the Orthodox Church through education and through the classical, the Philhellene, the deep truths that go back to the Eastern Roman Empire and that spread globally have produced science and culture and so many wonderful things. If we know exactly what we want and the basic principles that will never compromise, everybody at the St. Constantine School, for the most part, teaches. And when I say for the most part, sometimes you hire somebody and for half a year they can't teach. Or sometimes it's hard initially to find the right role inside of teaching for the person you hire. But we are not an administrative apparatus. We're a group of teachers who run a school. Well, that's a core principle. That's our DNA. Everyone on the cabinet supports that position. And so as you begin to look for a successor, make sure that you're conveying what the real DNA of the organization is. And most of the time, I find people don't know what that is. We're not us if we're not this way anymore. For some people, that may tie into a particular location. We're not us if we're not in Houston anymore. Now, we weren't designed to be that way. We were designed to grow and branch out and be other places. But it could be that your organization, we feed poor people in this neighborhood. That's what we do. We don't have a national mission. And we do it this way, and this is who we are. Now notice, methodologies, a particular season, a time when you can do things a certain way can change. The St. Constantine School does not do online education. Online education isn't our thing. If you want to do online education, and except in a pandemic where we are doing online education because we have to, we're not the place for you. In the future, it may be that we can't even say that. And so something online will have to be done. The vision, some pieces of it, the technology may change. We may have to introduce some of those elements. I hope not, but we always have to be open to that. What is changeable about our DNA? Here's what's not changeable. The one holy Catholic Apostolic Orthodox Church. That's part of our DNA. We also minister to all of God's children, and you don't have to be Orthodox to teach here. That reaching out that's so normal inside of Orthodox education historically, whether it's the university in Lebanon or other places, is part of who we are, and it would change us deeply. Do we know that? Do we know who we are enough to begin to produce successors? Finally, or nearly finally, plan your exit if you can, and then actually leave. I have worked with or for people who, I mean, it's really tempting if you're an excellent leader for people to keep saying, hey, John Mark, I know you said you were going to retire when you're 70, but what if you stayed another couple of years? No, if you make an exit plan, generally speaking, short of a pandemic or a world war or something that's really unexpected, make an exit plan and then stick to it. So, for example, I think in most organizations, 10, 15, 20 years, maybe it's time to move on, especially if you were a young person and founded an organization. You get to be in your mid-40s, you get to be about 50 years old. Everybody's heard every joke you have. Everybody's heard every story 5,000 times. You might be on a cycle of just repeating and lacking vision for where the organization is going to go. So make sure you say, okay, this is a job I'm going to do for about 17 years when I signed up. And then I hope that I can retire into teaching inside the college program and be the avuncular Plato scholar for as long as God keeps me on the earth. And generally speaking, you should make a plan and stick to it. Because if you love your job, like most of us do, it's tempting to stay. And I don't care what level of an organization you're at, eventually you should think about that. You love teaching Sunday school. You've led the Sunday school at your parish. You created the Sunday school at your parish. At what point should that leader step back, having raised up a generation of awesome Sunday school teachers, and become the helper to the side, the advisor, the wise woman, the wise man who stands to the side? If we can, if God gives us the great blessing of allowing us to live in an organization long enough to plan our exit, then make sure we plan our exit, and then if we can, leave. Follow that plan. And I've just seen organization after organization stagnate because they won't change leadership. A leader clings to power just a little bit too long and even harms their own heritage. So plan your exit, and if you can do it, leave. Now, also, I've seen organizations be in a period of crises, and so the leader needs to stay. But notice, if you plan your exit carefully, you've slowly helped a board or your parish find the next leader, and you can soft transition from being the head, from being the leader, from being a dean at a lower level, to your successor taking your place. And so maybe the crisis is the perfect time for them to step up and use some of that new energy. I walked at a duck pond with Phil Johnson, and you're looking at the College of 2020 at the College of St. Constantine, the first college program of its kind integrated with a K-12 school that removed debt, that placed Orthodox Christianity at the center of education. Phil wasn't Orthodox, though I think he was in spirit. And one Thursday last year, I called him every Thursday on the phone. He was very, very excited. And he was very excited about the college program at the St. Constantine School. And he said, the stuff we talked about at the duck pond, it's happening. We're getting it done. We're growing. And Orthodoxy, that's the place it can happen. This is so exciting. No one else can do this. This is the Orthodox moment in education because we don't have a giant bureaucracy in the United States giant school systems we have to revolutionize, colleges that have drifted away from the faith that we have to try to pull back. This is it. And he was very excited, very passionate. His mind was very sharp that day. And I was at St. Joseph's here in Houston at a service, and I got a call in the middle of the service. I don't normally pick up my phone, but it was Kathy Johnson, and she hardly ever calls me. I knew it couldn't be good news. Stepped outside the service, and Phil died that night. And so I came to realize that that year, when we were going to graduate, our first graduates, and as you can see in the program on the next page, where our very best graduate would enter into what we call the Order of Philip E. Johnson, the highest award our college gives to a graduating senior. We gave it to all three of our first graduating seniors because they had taken such a chance on us. That Phil had sown many seeds in many people who have gone on to do much more important things perhaps than I'll ever do, and who are much better scholars, much better speakers, much better thinkers. But here's one small thing that I hope becomes a big thing by God's good grace. He walked at a duck pond and planted the seeds of leadership in a goofy 30-year-old from West Virginia who was Orthodox. And at the day of his death, he was able to talk about seeing those seeds come to fruition. Phil Johnson was a success because he had successors, not me. The hundreds of Torrey Honors Institute graduates from Biola University that he helped find the funding to allow me to create. And then for so many of his friends, people like Fred Sanders, to come alongside his faculty as he headhunted in the early days for me, for talent, to come and make that program success. Those students are all over the world doing exciting things, many of them upholding the values that he believed in so deeply. But here at St. Constantine, we're his final project, his ultimate duck pond strategy, which was to take a small thing, a wedge, and look at a giant thing, institutional higher education that seems so hostile at times to Orthodox Christian classical values, and to drive that thin edge of the wedge into that giant bureaucracy and split it open, not to destroy anything, but to set people free to create lots of small things, to educate without debt, to do some of the things that this little tiny college program that honors his memory are doing. There's no success without a successor, and the successors are, of course, the many Sunday school students that teachers produce, the many converts that come to the Orthodox faith through the work that so many of the ministries of the OCLI are involved in. Let's not be afraid. Let's not be afraid to admit we're not going to live forever. Let's not be afraid that an organization doesn't need us forever. Let's admit that those things are true and so produce success by producing successors. This is John Mark Reynolds, president of the St. Constantine School.